Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Bitcoin Mentor Q&A. I'm Ed behind the Live Free BTC handle, and today we have Nathan behind the Bitcoin Mentor handle and Gary as well, part of Bitcoin Mentor.
Hey,
Scott,
everybody.
hey Gary. We have Scott Lindberg as our guest speaker today. And at any point, if you'd like to come up and ask a question, raise your hand, and we'll be glad to have you join in the conversation, talk about anything Bitcoin. Scott, how you doing today?
And doing great, Ed. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to talking.
Absolutely. I enjoyed our conversation last time, so glad to have you back here.
Scott, thanks for joining us. What's new?
Is that Gary? I was trying to keep
Yeah,
track of who's talking.
that's me.
It's been a little while. Man, yeah, it's we're getting ready to, or I'm going to go down to El Salvador in a couple weeks. That's new.
That's pretty
Gonna go,
cool.
we're going to go. I'm going to go to the adopting Bitcoin and also to the unconference. So there's another unconference the day before, just like we had up in Nashville.
That
So
sounds great. I know you invited me. It was unfortunate I couldn't make it, but I do appreciate you guys inviting me to join you in Nashville. It was a great time. For those that don't know, I helped out with Scott and Tally's table over there with all their really cool free market kids games, which we definitely would love to hear you talk about.
Yeah.
yeah, well,
Yeah, Scott, what's
yeah.
that unconference that you're talking about? I'm curious. What
So the idea of an unconference is it's the idea is you don't have any predetermined anything. I mean, in a pure unconference, you would literally just show up and people would say, "What do you want to talk about?" And then you would just go off and talk, basically. What this particular unconference is hosted by Me Premier Bitcoin, and it's a little bit of a hybrid because they do ask ahead of time for people who want to speak, but you also at the start of it, it's focused on Bitcoin educators, and you're looking at 100 to 150 people. And when you show up, basically when they kick it off, they give everybody a chance to just grab the microphone and say, "Hey, I just want to talk about X, Y, and Z." You just whatever subject's on your mind, and you give your 30 seconds, 1 minute pitch, and then they have a tally board like a whiteboard. You just kind of say, "How many people want to talk with Ed and Gary about education? How many people want to talk about videos? How many people want to talk games? Whatever, any subject you want." And then that's it. Like that's the way the day goes. It's you don't have merchant tables set up like you would at a big conference. And the idea is it's focused on the content. And so this is the fourth one that Me Premier has done. I think it's number four. I'm starting to lose track. I've attended two out of the first three, and they're a blast. They're just a blast. You go really deep with your conversations with people, as opposed to more of a high pace type of tempo you have at the bigger conferences, because people are rushing between one presentation or another presentation, or they're checking out a booth or whatever it is. This is much more relaxed. You go much deeper, and it's in this case it's focused on Bitcoin education. So it's a lot of fun. I highly recommend it to anybody who's never been to one. One of the most enjoyable events I've ever been to.
I like that
That's
idea.
fantastic, Scott. Yeah, it's a wonderful concept, and I imagine you do get the opportunity then, where it's going to feel. It's almost like it kind of reminds me of like TV versus podcast. Where you're going to get more of like a proper intimate feel, dive a little deeper, take your time, and really expand on the different topics that speakers might have at an event. It's definitely something worth checking out. Just jumping back for a second here, Scott, too. So, with free market kids, what exactly, for anyone who's not familiar, what are you guys doing there? And then, more importantly, too, how did this get started? Because I feel like all the Bitcoin entrepreneurs that we've talked to, I'm guessing it's something similar with you, where it's a product that you wanted and then you ended up going out and creating for yourself and then making a business out of it. But maybe I'm wrong.
No. I appreciate you asking. So it started because my wife and I homeschooled. We have four kids. At this point, they're all past the high school age. And I happen to like games. And so I would try to incorporate games into our education. So, for example, if anybody ever played Cash Flow, Robert Kiyosaki's game, we thought, hey, this is a way that we could teach the kids about financial statements. And that game actually does work. You really will learn the financial statements, but it's not fun to learn. And when I created games on my own, I wanted them to be fun, even if they had an education flavor to it. you fast forward to somewhere around 2019-ish, maybe 2020. I was just getting started down the rabbit hole of Bitcoin. The kids were still being schooled by Tali, and she did not. She just looked at me like I was crazy. I'm like, you gotta listen to these podcasts, you gotta listen to these books, you gotta hear about this Bitcoin thing. And it wasn't until so I built a game called Hodl Up based on how Bitcoin worked. And while we were playtesting, and I was playtesting it with primarily my brother and my older son, who are not Bitcoiners, they would ask me a question. I wouldn't know the answer. I'd have to do research. I'd come back, iterate, playtest. They'd ask more questions, and I'd have to do research. And so this was a learning process for me. But what it meant for Tali was when she finally played the game, she could there's a your tact it's a tactile type of thing. You're physically moving things around. And that was enough for her to open up, to say, "Oh, that's what we're talking about." And that's it was enough for her to say, "Oh, okay, I'll listen to an Audible book, or I'll listen to something else." And that's what led to her ultimately being orange pilled. So Free Market Kids is just our company. We focus on money education more than just Bitcoin, but that's a huge part of it, obviously. And our goal is we want to educate the next generation. We want to give them the tools they need to be successful. We're not teaching Austrian economics in school. We're not teaching the true money history. We're not teaching things like Bitcoin. And so somebody has to build the products to help out there. And so Free Market Kids, the mission of Free Market Kids is to help be that bridge, to help create the content. And everything has to pass that fun test. I don't want something that's like that cash flow example I gave you, where you play it and it's like pulling teeth. It takes a long time, no one is enjoying it, and you're not going to pull it out for fun. I wanted to have something that was you could play for fun, or if you wanted to go down the education rabbit hole, you could go ahead and do that. Either way. So
Oh, that's fantastic. And you're absolutely right. I mean, if you got to find other ways of getting people interested in these sort of things and bringing them the information without having it sound like a dry lecture, particularly if they don't see maybe the problems that exist in the world. They're not preconditioned to receiving it. It reminds me a lot of even some earlier conversations we had regarding TV and movies, and how I think for the next wave of adoption, the cultural aspects are so important. And the stories that we tell, into that same vein, I think something like a game has that same sort of it's the sly roundabout way of sneaking Bitcoin to the conversation and helping people better understand it without it just being a 3-hour lecture on the subject.
yeah. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, if you actually want to play the game to introduce somebody to Bitcoin, the best thing you should do is shut up about Bitcoin and literally just play the game. Just have fun until they ask you a question. But the moment you try to sneak it in there.
No, I may have hit the mute everybody button. If I did, that was my bad. For Scott, I think I cut you off halfway through.
Oh, all right. What part? I don't know where you. I didn't catch that.
You got cut off if you try to sneak it in there. Good place to get cut
don't
off.
sneak it in. Don't sneak it in. If you want to use it as a bridge to help somebody get into Bitcoin, don't actually tell them that. Just play the game, have fun, and wait for them to ask you a question. Because the moment you start to try to tell them stuff, it's going to sound like a lecture, and people have really good radars for when people are trying to persuade them on whatever it is. You're going to sound like an evangelist. You're going to sound like you're crazy. Whatever it is, they're going to shut down. So that my advice to you is, if you want to use this as a bridge to pre-coiners, just shut up and play, and wait until they ask a question, and then it's okay to start talking. But until then, just play.
I completely agree. I was gonna say one of my favorite little lines from negotiations is negotiations are the art of having somebody else get your way. And as try as I might to get the horses to drink, they've got to come to it at least somewhat on their own terms. If they're not going to be open to the ideas, they're not going to be open to hearing it. Ace, I do remind me at some point in time, I do actually want to ask you about homeschooling as well too. I think that's fantastic, and I want to know a little bit more for my own selfish reasons. But AC, you were kind enough to join us on stage here. I'm curious if you have any questions or comments.
Oh, hey, thanks for bringing me up again. Really, this is just a shout out to Scott. Scott and I met in person for the first time at BitBlock Boom earlier this year. And, that's one of my fondest memories is playing Hodl Up there at, LobbyCon almost every evening. And then again at the Unconference in Nashville. So really just wanted to give a shout out to Scott. Amazing game. And yeah, I love playing it. And tell Tali I said hi.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you, AC. Ed, I'm curious before we dive into maybe some homeschooling questions or something else down the line. Did you have anything else on your mind that you wanted to add?
Well, I too am very interested in hearing about the homeschooling stuff because I have a young one that's not quite ready for school yet, but it's something on our radar. So definitely looking into that. But I think Scott's going to be right back. But I just wanted to comment on that point he made about talking to pre-coiners and I guess just orange pilling in general. And I totally agree. I think that a lot of people um, in the Bitcoin space get a little jaded when they feel like they know, they see it, they realize that Bitcoin is a solution to a lot of issues and has been beneficial to their own lives. And yet, other people might just not see that yet. And sometimes we get into lecture mode and we start to, you know, like he said, evangelize, and we lose people that way. And I think that um, fiction, like like made up stories and just myths and fiction are go a long way in pulling people in and being able to influence the way they're thinking without making it feel like you're reading out of a textbook or reading from someone that's evangelizing a particular opinion. So I totally agree with that, and I love that you guys do the games because I think that that's like a great avenue. I had played it with some of my family and the Huddle Up board game, and we had a ton of fun. And I didn't bring it up at one point. They all know I'm into Bitcoin though, so it wasn't any surprise that I'm coming there with a Bitcoin game. But it was a lot of fun, and it sparked a couple questions, and that was that. And they learned from it, but it didn't have to do any more than that. It's just an exposure, and I think that goes a long way. Just exposing people to it and getting little touch points here and there goes a long way.
I completely agree, Ed. And actually, for my own benefit, because I'm kind of curious, because I haven't played Huddle Up yet. It's still on my list of things I need to buy. In terms of gameplay, how long is it running? How many people? From just the gaming experience, what did you find about it?
Yeah. It's not a long game. I mean, the first time you play like any board game is going to take a little bit longer because you have to just explain the rules. But in general, the rules are pretty straightforward. It's not too complicated. There are a ton of mechanics to go through it. I'd say maybe plan for like an hour and a half for that first game, but it's definitely about an hour for any other game or so. You're not really spending hours and hours. It's not a whole evening event to play the board game. And I think that like I said, my child's not that old yet that he could play a board game, but I could imagine like a younger kid being able to play it too. Maybe like 7, 8 could definitely play that kind of game.
Oh, that's fantastic. Because I mean, for me personally, I'm just so busy with things, but I try to make the games nights every couple of months or so, just the excuse to like have a couple friends over, just a reason to meet up, sit down and do something. And occasionally we just found ourselves, because again, I used to play a lot more when I was the younger man without the kids, but they're coming down after the kids are in bed. We're all setting up, getting comfortable, and we just can't do the like all night board games anymore too. So it's nice that, okay, if it's even the first time running through, we could be, at maybe 2 hours set up and play and have a good evening with some friends. Scott, welcome back. We were just talking about the actual gameplay for Huddle Up, and I saw you had some other ones as well too. Could you really tell us a little bit about those other games?
Yeah, I'd love to. I switched over to my phone. Can you guys hear me okay?
Got you loud and
Yeah,
clear,
sounds good.
sounding great.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know what the heck's going on. Like, you guys kept cutting out on my laptop, and I'm like, I can't even participate. So,
Oh,
if
quick
I could
side
just
note,
follow
I've
up
had
on what,
so many
yeah,
issues with spaces. Like it's just been a nightmare for me in the background with that every
yeah,
now and then. But please,
it's
please do.
fine.
Yeah, follow up.
It's fine. I just want to comment on whoever was just saying that the game night with family. One of the best things that I like about the tabletop games is, especially like after COVID, we need more human interaction. This is why we have in-person events like meetups and the small conferences and things. It's so powerful, and for a family to spend time together, that's huge. So whoever was just talking about that if you can play game night once a week just to get the family together, you're doing so much good for your kids. I mean, it's just awesome. The question on the other games, yeah, we have a game that's focused on Lightning. It's called Channel Up, and in that game, the object is you're basically managing your liquidity, you're opening and closing channels, and you're trying to be the first player to buy 2 pizzas with Bitcoin. Then we have a game called BIP 39. I went through the list of BIP 39 words, and I categorized them. I took out all the ones related to living creatures, and basically what happens, it's about as hard as Pictionary or charades. Somebody's the oracle. They pick 3 words out of the deck and they put them in order, and everybody else gets to ask questions of the oracle, trying to figure out the right words in the right order. And so again, you could teach about seed phrases if you want to, or you could just have fun. Next year, we're going to do Fed Up, which is going to be a social deception game talking about how to end the Fed. That one's not out yet, but it is. I mean, you can do a pre-sale now if you want, but that one's not available till next year. And then the first game I ever made, going back like a decade, is called "Is That the Best You Can Do?" And that's about, if you're from an Austrian economic standpoint, think about how pricing works, where the value is really determined by the people in that, the buyer and the seller. And so it's a negotiation game. And the name came from what we advised our then 7-year-old, who was the youngest, that if he got stuck with his older siblings, to just say, "Is that the best you can do?" So so we have one that's on pricing, we have one on Bitcoin, one on layer 2, one on seed phrases, and the goal is every year we'll come out with another game based on a first principle idea, and trying to turn that idea into something that's fun, that you can play in less than an hour.
Oh, that's awesome. Is there, for the game that's coming out, Fed Up, what can we kind of expect from the actual gameplay? What's the, if you can give us even like a quick preview?
So that one, if you've ever played, I think it's called, was it Killing Hitler? I forget the name of it now.
Oh, Secret Hitler?
Secret Hitler. Thank you. Yeah, if you play
Yes, I
Secret
have played a
Hitler.
lot of Secret Hitler.
Okay, that's a social deception game. And so for those that haven't played, everybody has a role, but nobody knows who's who, and you have and you either win or lose as a team, and you're trying to achieve your objective. So in Fed Up, you have the clowns and you have the heroes. The heroes are trying to end the Fed, and obviously the clowns, they're either trying to add more regulation or they're trying to print more money. And so it's the same idea of a social deception type of game, where you don't know who's who. And yeah, if you can end the Fed, then you win. So I wanted to have something that was fiat based, that wasn't too serious. Like Channel Up is like Lightning was more challenging to build a game around than Bitcoin. It's just more complex, and I really wanted to do something that was a little bit more lighthearted. And I thought a social deception type of game really fit Clown World, and that was the motivation for Fed Up. Plus, I
That's
like the word of it too. By the way, you got hodl up, channel up, and I just thought, well, Fed Up. I just thought that was funny. So
It fits perfectly. Yeah, you gotta keep
Yeah, that's
this theme
awesome.
going. I don't know what the next up game will be, but now you're stuck with it for 3, right?
Mhm.
Funny side
Oh
note,
yeah,
I,
oh
I,
yeah.
I have I have 2 kids. Both their names begin with L, and that was just a coincidence. And now we're doing the third. It's like, okay, do we have to keep this now that we've done it twice? Does the third one have to be an L as well?
Oh, congratulations though. Keep going
Oh,
with the
thank you,
family.
sir.
You're
Oh,
about that.
that's the goal.
That's a zone defense now. You gotta.
Yeah. We're going to be outnumbered. It's funny talking about the social deception game, and I can't remember if I heard this, if it was used for it as a way of explaining it, or was the original purpose. I don't remember if it was Secret Hitler or One Night a Werewolf, or which one it was, but I remember hearing interesting kind of research topic on the subject where they were using the hidden identity games as a way of illustrating that an informed minority will on average outperform an uninformed majority. And I just think that's a really interesting kind of side note when we're talking about Bitcoin as well too. The idea that we don't actually have to reach a majority position in order to have an outsized influence and to steer things in the direction that we want. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that, Scott.
No, so that's. I think I've heard something similar to that before. I'm still early in the design phase, and just candidly had not thought about that yet. I'm still the game design takes a lot of iteration and trying to balance how many of in this case how many of the different players there are. So um, no, I think it's an interesting thing. There's some psychology there, some game theory there. No, that's an interesting thing. I don't have any other deep thoughts to really add to what you say, but I think it's an interesting framework.
It's definitely something to think about. It's something that kind of, for whatever reason, just stuck with me. It's just that power, the asymmetrical power of having information that isn't shared amongst everybody, right? AC, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on this. He does not, or he can't find his mute button. One of the two. Totally fine. Before I want to do maybe a bit of a pivot to homeschooling, because I'm curious on that. I know that you and Gary have, like, Gary's done some work with you guys as well too. So I was just curious how you guys know each other, and what's the story there?
Yeah, Gary. Oh, yeah, Gary. How did we meet? I'm trying to remember it when we first talked,
You,
and I don't remember the first conversation now.
no,
Remind me.
you guys had an ad out. You were looking for folks to help out with free market kids
Oh
in a sales
yeah,
position. And I basically responded back, I love your idea. I checked out your website. I think it's great. I'm totally into the homeschooling idea. I have my kids in sort of like a Montessori type environment that goes 4 days a week and high parental involvement. And I've read all the books, like Unschooled by Carrie McDonald and Peter Gray, Free to Learn, and Free Range Kids, Lenore Skenazy. So we were very much in the same track. But then I also added an email. I'm probably the worst salesman in the entire world. So I would be horrible for this job. But if there's ever a way that we might be able to find a way to work together in the future, let me know. And then I think a couple weeks later, like, well, we could use a hand down to Nashville. And I said, well, I've been looking for an excuse to go to Nashville. And then we met up at the Bitcoin conference, and it was
that's
great to
right.
work with you and Tally. And I had a great time. And I played Huddle Up. So it all worked out.
Yeah, now it comes back. We really appreciated your help out there. For those that don't know, we Tali and I were basically volunteered to run the game lounge at the Nashville. Um, I guess that's what they call it, the game lounge, and it was not easy, and we needed help, a lot of volunteers to help. Gary, he was there every day, helped out, played I don't know how many hours of games. But we appreciate that. That was awesome.
No, I enjoyed it. It was a good time. And, you guys basically paid for my ticket to get in. So it was a win win. Everybody wins.
Yeah, I like that value for value there.
Yep.
Yeah, isn't that magical when we have voluntary exchange? How everyone's just better off at the end for it.
Yeah, it
Well,
works.
I'll take that and pivot to the homeschooling for a second, Scott. So I imagine that this is something, if you homeschooled all three kids who are now out of the high school phase, that it's something you might be relatively passionate about or something that's really important to you. So I'm curious what it was that led you to decide to homeschool. And then maybe we can jump into some lessons or things you learned along the way.
Oh yeah, this one, Tali and I will talk for hours. So we have 4 kids. All 4 of them are done with the the K through 12 program, and Tali and I had met in business school. But when we had our first, for a variety of reasons, Tali said that if we could get by as a family with one income, she wanted to stay home with the kids, and that was the start of it. And we just made it work. It wasn't always easy, but that's what we did. And along the way you learn a lot, and we have a better framework for that. So there's some things that you're trying to avoid. So you don't want your kid to call somebody else mom like they might do with a nanny. You don't want them to be in an environment where they can't be creative, and they're being forced to conform. You don't want them to be held back. You don't want a lot of the woke agenda that might be in programs now. On the other hand, there's a lot of upside. Your kids can accelerate in anything that they put anything that's of interest. They can just accelerate. I think personally, homeschool kids are better socialized, not worse, and it's amazing. And then of course the relationship that you build with your kids. And I just whenever I hear jokes, whether it's on I don't know, some kind of sitcom or movie, and they talk about the parent child relationship. Let me give you an idea. Like, so our girls are in college now, and they just took it for granted that they were going to continue to talk to Tali and I all the time. And their friends, when they would mention to their friends that they were going to talk to their parents, that their friends didn't understand. They're like, "What do you talk to your parents? You share stuff?" And so there's these upsides that are just amazing on it. And so now we're inspired to share that with other people. We started a podcast called Bitcoin Homeschoolers. We are multiple weeks behind launching. We've got a lot of ideas of programs. We just need to get those out. But um, and we're working on some material that eventually will be turned into a book as well. So we're happy to talk to anybody about homeschooling anytime. If you think about it, it's usually pretty easy to talk to a Bitcoiner, because all I have to do is say, listen, if you have sound money, You need a sound education. If you want separation of money and state, you should have separation of education and state. If you want self-custody money, you want to self-custody your education. I mean, it's so easy to convince a Bitcoiner to go to homeschooling. When we go to homeschooling conferences, going the other direction, even though the values are aligned, that's a little bit more of an uphill battle. Things like the Tuttle twins coming out with their programs and things like that are going to make it easier to get homeschoolers to become Bitcoiners. But it's usually pretty easy to go from Bitcoin parents to homeschooling parents because the values are so aligned. And so obviously when Tali and I started homeschooling, we didn't know any of that. Bitcoin didn't exist. Um, but this is what we know, and this is where we can contribute and give back to other people because this is what we know. We're not super technical people. I like games, I like tabletop games. I mean, I'm not a programmer. So um, these are the things that we know, and these are the things that we love to talk about and love to share with other people. But yeah, that's a roundabout way of saying anything you want to talk about with homeschooling, let's go. Yeah.
Yeah,
All right,
Scott,
let's do it.
I have to say, like the example you gave about your kids like wanting to talk to you as they got older is it really is heartbreaking to think that kids wouldn't want to talk to their parents as they got older because I love my parents and I get along with them, but I do see my peers having issues like that where they just don't feel the same way, and I would hate to see my kids in that position. And I think that we do outsource a lot of that connection with our kids when we send them to a school for 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, and they're just being raised by their peers or by strangers, and it's just not. Aside from the stuff that they learn that you could argue is just pure propaganda and incorrect information, it's just really the nurturing process too for like especially the younger age kids, so I really respect you guys going in that direction and offering resources like the podcast for people that are interested because like I said, I'm very interested in that stuff and that's definitely the route that I'm going to take. Nathan, I wanted to hear what you were going to say there.
Well, first of all, when you were going through, I thought you were going to say self custody money and self custody kids. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Like, I want to keep those fucking things. I love them to pieces. And to Ed's point, right? I mean, it's like my wife's not replaceable. I can't just like pay somebody else to like take her spot on a date or any sort of events that we have. My kid's mother's not replaceable. And the idea of them spending more time with strangers that change every year, also being forced into a group of kids all the same age, which seems really unnatural to me. Like there's supposed to be that kind of learning to have the unscripted, the uncontrolled, unstructured play, and it should be with children of different age ranges, right? That's where I think you get the better social interactions and they learn to develop and negotiate for themselves too. And to add to your point, it is quite heartbreaking that people don't have this sort of relationship and it's become normalized to such a degree that I find frustrating. Like my goal, and I've said this from before we had kids and made it very clear to my wife, my goal is to do such a good job delivering my kids to parenthood that they come and see me afterwards because they want to, not because they have to. And so, with that, Scott, I'm really curious to learn from your experience, particularly maybe getting going. Was there anything in the beginning of homeschooling that surprised you? Maybe it was way easier than you thought, or way harder.
Um, yeah, it does surprise you. So you some people thought, and Tolly thought this, that you had to be some type of teacher or you needed a certification, and I think that goes to the programming that we've had, where the government wants you to think that you need to rely on them, that you need to have a certificate, that you need to have a degree, that you need to have a whatever. And the truth is, humans have been helping the next generation out forever, right? I mean, think about, I mean, I don't even know all the homeschoolers out there. Like if you look in history, if it was Lincoln or Washington or who, I mean, there's like, if you go back in time, this was completely normal. It's only as we've gotten to the later part of this fiat stuff that we think that you need to have somebody else tell you if you're qualified or not. You're already qualified. If you are a loving parent, you're already qualified. You're not going to mess your kid up if you're worried about them getting behind or anything else. Kids are super resilient, and in most cases, we're underestimating what they can do. It's just amazing. So I think that's part of it. The other thing is the I think in terms of surprises, it might be hard to explain it to other people. So I went to public school. My parents had gone to public school, and they almost took it as a personal, like I was like basically saying, "You didn't raise me right." Like it was some kind of personal insult to them, as saying, "This is just a personal decision that my wife and I made on our own on how we want to raise our kids. This is not it. This is not saying anything at all. We're not trying to make a statement to anybody by doing this." And so the family reactions are interesting. Um, there's a lot of FUD, and there's a lot of state resistance to it. You'll have you have these people who come out with a chip on their shoulder because they think they know better. And um, I mean, we had someone here, like a neighbor, was talking about homeschooling, and someone showed up. Somebody reported them because their kids were outside at a time when other kids were in school, and somehow this was abusive. I'm like, to have kids outside is not abusive, right? And so when this guy showed up, it happened to be on a different day, and they happened to be in a 1 day private school that day or something else. But this guy thought that he could get in the house. He wanted them to show them his records and do all these other things. And you do have resources out there. There's the homeschooling defense league that you don't families, if you're going by one income, you don't have money to just go hire lawyers to fight these insane bureaucrats. And but there's a ton of resources out there to help you, so you're not alone. You're not on an island. There is so much support now with communities, with co-ops, with legal defense funds, and there's so much out there in the way of teaching resources. You got sailor.org, Khan Academy. You got a whole bunch of stuff that's where technology is actually bringing down the cost of education like it should. Like, you got this. If you want to homeschool your kids, there are so many resources behind you to go and do this. It's and the I guess the biggest surprise to me is going back to those relationships. Like, this is so meaningful. The things that we have now with our kids, that, like, you can't take that away from us. You can't take those experiences away from us. So it's not about how well they did on a certain test score or something else. It's so much bigger than that, and it is so rewarding that I am so grateful that when we started, we may not have known all that, but in hindsight, man, I can't recommend it enough to people who are either that are even considering it. And if you don't, that's fine. You can still do. I mean, even if you have to have two incomes to get by, you can still incorporate a lot of these same principles, right? You can still do game nights. You can still talk to them on the way to driving them to their sports things on the weekends. You can still ask them to watch documentaries or read books. You can still incorporate a lot of the same principles. Um, but the biggest upside is it's just amazing, these relationships. Like, it's just asymmetrical upside. But I was a little stunned about how much resistance there is, and it fits right into all the things that as Bitcoiners that we're frustrated with.
Yeah,
Somebody in the government thinks that you don't have your papers, or you don't have your certificate, or you don't have the whatever. Well, screw you. I don't need you. Like, who you're not. You don't own my kid. I
yeah,
own my kid.
I totally see what you're saying there too. I think there's just a little bit of that like status quo bias where people are that like you were mentioning earlier, they feel like um that you're pointing out something that they did wrong because they send their kids to public school or they went to public school as a kid. Um, and I couldn't agree less with that. I mean, I went to public school and I have a great relationship with my parents. It didn't, I think I turned out well compared to my peers. I mean, that's obviously subjective, but it really goes far in the parents' involvement just in general with the kids' upbringing. You have to, a lot of the homeschooling ideas is just putting all of that on the parents instead of, offloading some of that to the teachers. You're now taking the primary and pretty much whole responsibility of raising the child. And even if you are sending your kid to a public school, and look, like the fiat world we live in, it is unfortunate that people have to do that when they want to. Otherwise, they want to homeschool their kid and they need that second income. It is tough nowadays. So I sympathize with people like that in that position. And I just want to say, it goes a long way. Just reading to your kids or spending time with them and talking to them and asking them about their day. It'll go a long way in building that relationship with them.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
It's funny because the only thing, and I make this comment every now and then, but there are things in this world that are more valuable than Bitcoin, and one of them being our time. And particularly when your kids are young, you're never getting that time back. And even if you look at it from like the Austrian kind of perspective, it's like you pay for it now, pay for it later. Right? If you don't make the time for them now and build and foster these relationships later, you're not going to have the sway or influence. They're not going to care what you think down the road when they really could use your guidance if you don't care what they think and what's important to them now. And it's such an important thing to realize that you are investing in that relationship. And it'll pay so many dividends down the line. Even taking the extreme example, I have so many peers that are just completely foregoing kids in marriage. And it seems like such a short-sighted view of the world. Like, okay, you did all right. Maybe you retire early. Now what? Right? I mean, if you live to be 80 and you retire at 60, you still got what, 20 years left, and you're going to be on your own. I mean, your friends are going to have their own families and shit to do, and no one's going to come and spend time with you because, well, you didn't make them, really. And it's those things that come back to us again. It's that initial investment, taking the time, pushing it forward. And even now, I'm I understand the sentiment on, because people, again, if you do better and make a different decision, they almost personalize it as an attack on them. And I mean, I kind of got two minds about it where one is like, yeah, you did, but everything turned out okay, but can't we look to improve? Does that mean it was the best way to do it? Does that mean we cannot find a better way to do these things as well? And then the conversation I've personally had with my folks is that the public school that even I went to and that they went to, because my dad and I actually went to the same high school, it's not the same as what it is right now. I have friends that have older kids, and I hear some of the stories, and it just sounds atrocious. And to the point of now having this information, I think if you're aware of it at all, and then but turning a blind eye, there is that kind of negative. I can make a case for that's at least somewhat negligent. Scott, I'm just curious what you think of all that stuff.
I yeah, I think that yes, the schools today are not the schools of but that they were before. And by the way, can you hear me okay? Because your voice was the no the
Yeah,
I don't know if it was yours.
I
It was
heard it
my,
a little bit. I was able to hear what you were saying, but it just sounded a little choppy there, Nathan. So if you want to
okay.
step down, I don't know if it's your
Okay.
connection,
Roger that.
but
I'll step down and
Okay.
back. Yeah.
I just thought maybe it was me. I just want to make sure that I I wasn't going
that's all
through.
right.
Yeah, but I think the point is what I heard is that the listen, it is not the same. Things are changing, and that's one of the things that as we talked with my parents, now that they've seen the kids develop into adults, and they look at it differently than when then we first told them we were homeschooling, and I think it's hard to accept. It's I mean, how would they know that it's changed at schools and what's going on? I actually think this is a big reason why COVID. If there was one good thing that happened with COVID, is that we went from slowly cooking everybody to boiling the frog, and people could see what was really going on. I don't. It's not easy to see how things have changed. You can't see, and in some cases now, the teachers are not even allowed to tell parents. So they push a woke agenda. They want to change somebody's sex. They start introducing these. They start framing these questions in the kids' minds, and then they're not allowed to tell the parent that, hey, your kid, we've asked them enough questions, and now they think they're a different sex or something. And you, how would your parents know that the school system changed and what kids are talking about, what teachers are talking about, what's not getting taught? There's it's hard to it's hard to see that. It's almost like a black box. You just send your kids off, and then you're just hoping that somehow they go through whatever that program is and that they're going to be okay. And there won't be a woke teacher. There won't be any dangerous things presented to them, dangerous ideas. Um, it's changing. And I mean, look, and it's not accidental. If you guys would read any of things like John Taylor Gatto, this is intentional. This is what the state wants. There's a book called Dumbing Us Down, and he has a couple other books as well. And I recently read It was Rothbard did a thing. I'm trying to remember. It was called something like the Education and State. I forget the exact title. It's a pretty short read, and he talks about this. The intent of the state, the incentives of the state are not aligned with the parent. They are not aligned. And so what we're seeing, the things that you're describing where the school has changed and it's not the same school that your dad went to or you went to, this is intentional. This is not an accident. We're getting exactly what the system is designed to do. We're just surprised to see it. But this is by design.
I completely agree. And even I was just checking out, by the way, it is Education and State. I think I found it here on the Mises Institute website. And even looking at academic performance, it looks like homeschool education, they typically score 15 to 25% higher than their public school peers as well, too. And the other thing that I'm reminded of is I think, and I don't think we necessarily give this enough credit as well, too. I think a lot of times the only experience people have of violence in their life is at schools, from bullies and fights and these things too. And it's almost like, because it really is like a prison system when you look at these sort of things laid out. Gary, I'm kind of curious your thoughts on the matter.
Hey, sorry, my son just came in after getting into a fight with my daughter in the backyard. So speaking of spending time with kids, I'm sort of tending to that right now. Can you say hi, Charlie? Hi. Yeah, there he goes. That's my
What's up,
6-year-old.
Charlie?
Hey,
Yeah.
Charlie.
He can't hear you because I have headphones in, and he'd probably ignore you anyway because that's what he does. But I'll tell him you said hi.
Oh, beautiful. I'll pass it then to Scott then quickly, just on the ideas of homeschooled kids performing better, and even possibly public schools being the only experience people have of violence in their life. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts there.
Yeah, I don't know how to address the violence in terms of performing better. I'm not surprised. I mean, think about it. If you are a teacher and you have good intentions, you're a public school teacher. You basically have to teach to the middle, right? The people who are slow, you probably don't have time for them, and they may need to go and get extra help in the summer, or they just don't learn to read. And the advanced students are held back. And in homeschooling, if you are a good reader and you want to go deep on reading, like there's no stopping you. You just go as whatever subject it is, you can go as deep and as hard as fast as you can possibly go. It's sort of like a one-on-one coaching situation versus basic training. You got everybody's going to run the same pace kind of thing. So the fact that they perform better to me is not surprising. And then the other thing is that they're pretty good critical thinkers. Um, so for example, and it's also there's some things in there that are so much more subtle. So my wife is Chinese and I'm white, so our kids are mixed. We never ever told the kids that they were mixed ever. Whenever we went somewhere, they were just whoever they were, their individual names. And it wasn't until they went to college. It wasn't until they went to college that other people started, including professors, that other people would ask questions and say, "How do you feel about this? How do you feel about this that's whatever as a mixed person or whatever?" And they didn't even know what to say at first because they're like, "What?" Because we never taught them to think in race. But today, when you go to school, it's going to be, are you sure? Do you feel suicidal? Do you feel like the opposite sex? Do you feel guilt because of your race? Like just the fact that you're asking those questions, you are priming those kids for all kinds of issues. And it's more than just these test scores. So yeah, even if you perform better as homeschooling, the things that we're not grading with tests, like critical thinking and things about how we treat other people, those things are so much more important. And there's they're not even we're not even asking the right questions. The test scores to me are like trying to ask about a fiat price on something. It doesn't matter. It's made up by the people who control the system. So you as the parent should decide what are the things that you should be teaching. And if it's values and critical thinking, then you teach that. And so even if you're doing better in the test scores, I would say I, that's actually not the biggest deal. I think that's cool. It's just there's so many other things that we're missing because our incentives of parents are aligned with the kids' well-being. The incentives of the state and the schools are aligned with other priorities. And there's agendas, there's other things. So
That's
Sorry,
a
a little
very
ranting
no,
there.
no, I love it. That's a very interesting observation I hadn't even necessarily thought of. I mean, neither of my kids are at school age yet, too, but my wife is Native and I'm white, and I never even thought that that would be something that they then want to address in the class, which just seems absolutely ridiculous. Um, I have another couple questions, but Ed, I'll let you jump in first before maybe I change the subject a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's a fascinating story, and it's something that you know that the effect of cramming a bunch of people from different backgrounds into one area, and then you mix that in with the institutional indoctrination, and the topics that they like to push in the mainstream, that's what they're going to do. They're going to have to point out everyone's differences and then ask you about all this crap that really doesn't have anything to do with school, and it really is terrible. And I think what Nathan was saying earlier, how like the schools have just degraded, um, even since like we were younger and we were going to school. It's like this is all like part of it too, because I don't even remember that being a big deal when I was in school. So that could just very well be like a location thing, or just the times. But it is very sad that that's how they are now, because it's, especially in a college, to think like that's something even relevant to bring up to a college student. I find fascinating, but for a different reason. I did have a question, but it was regarding board games. So if Nathan, yours makes more sense, you could go ahead first.
I have so many, but I'll throw out one quick one because I'm going to take advantage of Scott's experience here and get his insight on this. So, for homeschooling and for just raising the kids in general, I'm very aware that I do not want to teach my kids just to be compliant towards authority, which means I'm going to have to deal with their preferences and a little bit defiance here and there as well too. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on navigating that.
On navigating, wait, say that again. Just want to make sure I understand the question. I'm not sure
Yes. So
I'm
the
processing
question
it.
is that I don't want my kids just to be compliant because I'm the authority figure, and I don't want to
Yeah.
I don't want to get rid of their natural sort of defiance and skepticism. But of course, that can make navigating circumstances sometimes difficult, right? There's nothing wrong spending the time explaining, but I'm just curious on basically parenting. If you have any thoughts on this, and then what worked maybe for you.
Yeah. Okay. So I do think I've actually someone asked me that early on. I think when we were on like our first podcast ever was with Odell, and I think Odell asked a question like that with this idea that homeschooling parents are going to the equivalent of indoctrinate their kids, like in a so like a military way or a religious way or whatever way. And I don't find that. My observation is homeschooling kids are really good at thinking for themselves. So as a parent, you're going to encourage them to figure things out on their own. And you don't learn by watching somebody else. You learn by trying to do it yourself. And then you fall down, you get your bruises, and you get back up. And I just I have not found that I think our kids, in a respectful way, will stand up for their own opinions, even with us. And so I don't have any studies to cite or anything like that. I'm just going by my observation that I do think that homeschooling kids. Here's something that is another observation: is we never taught to our kids like they were babies. When we talk to our kids, we just talk to them with a normal voice, like an adult voice. And when you take your kids out everywhere you go, they meet so many people, including adults, that our kids can have a conversation, an actually coherent conversation with people of any age, and it comes across to adults as very surprising because they're not used to. They might call it a maturity level. They might think it's something else, but it has to do with this. They have seen how people interact because you set the example for them. You've involved them in that. You've treated them like human beings, and the result of that is they are able to talk to other people, and then if you disagree, you can actually talk it. It's not like the politics of today where you disagree and you got to cancel somebody. It's it's just what we consider normal. Treat other people the way you want to be treated type of thing. The golden rule, and it just um, they come across as better thinkers and as they have better interpersonal skills. So again, I don't have any studies to cite or anything like that for you, but just observationally, that's what I've seen.
That's awesome. Thank you, Scott. Just a reminder to the audience too, if anybody has a question, if you want to come up, you want to comment or something you want to throw out to the group, we'd love to have you here. But Ed, I'll pass it to you to pivot to gaming.
Yeah, thanks. And I totally agree with what you were saying there, Scott. But yeah, to get on the topic of board games, I imagine you have some kind of passion for just games in general, specifically board games, if you've already made a few. And I personally have gotten into board games as I've gotten a little older, and I find it to be a great, fun, like in person experience to share with people, and it's lighthearted, fun experiences. So I'm curious, like, do you have particular board games that might have been like an inspiration for the ones that you've made yourself? And then on top of that, what are some good like just board games in general that you would recommend to people?
Yeah. Yeah, my brother and I have gone to a game conference probably every year for a decade. Like we just for fun, just because that was he enjoyed them, I enjoyed it, we would just go. So there was no one game I think that was saying, here's what I want to use to um to make, for example, for Huddle Up. So in Huddle Up, I would just take whatever I thought worked well with other games. But it was all based on all the mechanics were based on Bitcoin. So that the mechanics had nothing to do with other games. But you have like a standard set of things that you can use. If you want to introduce entropy, you can use a die or you can use cards as an example. That's a pretty straightforward game thing. So no, I don't have one in terms of game design. I like the idea of trying to apply the right type of game for whatever it is that you're doing. Like we talked about earlier in the conversation, where a social deception game to me aligns well with the theme of Fed Up, right? But if I look at something like Channel Up, it's where you're trying to balance your liquidity with your channels. It's a pretty complex game. I looked at game when I did that one. I was looking at games like Mancala because you're moving pieces around a board. You're sharing a board and you're moving pieces. So I would just try to take the mechanics of games that have been around for a long time in terms of like the physical pieces of games, and then I would just apply them to a theme in whatever way that would work. So Huddle Up, I think the first time I made Huddle Up, it was with mahjong tiles. Then my next iteration, it was with dice, and then eventually it was with cards and the coins that you guys are familiar with. So it kind of you just keep iterating and trying to figure out which physical pieces match whatever it is that you're trying to do. In terms of just schooling or not schooling, just fun with the family. I personally, from a game standpoint, I love games that have really really simple rules and complex strategies. So if you look at Go or Mancala, you can explain the rules in 2 minutes, but if you want to try to master that, that's a lifetime skill. Like that's really difficult. When I design a game, I don't if you and I were going to play chess, it's 100% strategy. If you're a better chess player than me, it's probably not going to be fun to play because you're just going to beat me every time. But if I introduce entropy like you do with Catan, even an experienced player can still lose to a new player, right? So if you want to have something that you can play together with friends or family in less than an hour, you don't want it to be you want to be able to have a strategy, but you don't want it to dominate where if you use that strategy, nobody else will ever beat you, right? And so I want to mix it up. So in my game, a lot of times I play my game, I lose, and then people make fun. They say, "Oh, you're the game designer. How could you lose?" Well, because I entered, you have cards in there, you have things in there like a rolling a die that introduce entropy to it, and therefore you and I can play a game and have fun, even if I've played it 1,000 hours and you've never played it. We can still do that, and those are the games that I enjoy with the family. So if we play card games, there's a couple games that we play. Those are the kind of things that I'm looking for. And then just personally, in my family, there's a tradition of cribbage. So I played cribbage with my grandfather, and I don't know how many generations it goes back, but my kids have now played with my dad. And that's not a game that you would call exciting, um, but it's not about the game. It's about multiple generations spending a half an hour or an hour together at a table and talking. and or not talking, just sitting with each other. It's about the fellowship. So the fellowship thing is a huge deal for me. If you can spend time with other people, that's really really a big deal. And so much of our time today, we're looking at our phones, we're looking at a TV, we're looking at whatever, and we're not actually just being with other human beings. And so, um, even if you didn't have the most exciting game, again, cribbage is not that exciting to people who don't play it, but for me, it's a big deal because it represents time I spent with family members that are no longer around. And now my kids have played it with my dad, and then someday maybe they'll play it with their grandkids, right? So there's a fellowship tradition in there. And I just, we, the COVID really hit that. We really need to spend more time with other people just as human beings. So, so it's a long way of saying the game thing depends. If I'm in game mode, if I'm in family mode, I'm on teaching mode. The games are pretty adaptable. You can use them any way you want. Those are the ways that it means something to me.
Yeah, no, that's great. I really appreciate you giving us some of that stuff. And I personally love Catan. I found that to be a great board game for people that are, maybe getting into the want a little more complexity and have a little bit more fun, but it's definitely lighthearted, like you said, and you can have someone that's not not too experienced beat the person that's teaching the game, just by the luck components that are involved there. So I really appreciate that. And since we're heading at the top of the hour now, I just wanted to give Gary and Nathan here a chance to ask any questions or get any thoughts out that you guys had.
Go for it,
Well,
Gary.
yeah, I don't want to step on that kind of great close that you gave Scott, but also Scott is too kind to really promote his own games himself, so I'm going to do it for him. I had the chance to play Huddle Up many times when I was over at the conference, and I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun, and kind of going along with the theme of homeschooling versus sitting in a classroom and being lectured at all day. When I first sat down to play, one of Scott's associates sat there and tried to explain the rules to me, and my eyes glazed over. I was like, this makes no sense. I don't understand it. That could just be a function of my own stupidity. But once I actually sat down to play it instead of being lectured at, if you think of a Monopoly board and you think you kind of make that first trip down that one quarter of the board, by the time I got to the equivalent of that in the game, I picked it up, I understood it, and from there, it was all just strategy, and it was a lot of fun. And I played 5 or 6 different rounds, I think, that first day, and it was just different strategy every time. As Scott said, there's that element of chance, that entropy involved, which made it a lot of fun. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. I unfortunately did not get a chance to play all of the games, but go check it out. I know we're doing a 10% off discount, so Scott, I'm going to plug it for you because you didn't really do it yourself. You're in the mood to speak more thoughtfully
Thank you
today, and
very
we all
much.
appreciate that. But go get the game; it's a lot of fun.
Thank you very
I
much.
got nothing to add to that.
Yes, yeah, me too. Play the games. Huddle Up, I can speak personally. That's a great game, and I am considering getting. Channel Up looks like a lot of fun. I was just on the website while we were talking here, so I might that might be my second venture into the free market kids board games. So thank you so much, Scott. And is there anything you want to share with everybody listening here before we end it up?
No, I appreciate your guys' time. We're here if you guys want to talk about games and get some. Obviously, we'd be happy to sell those to you. If someone wants help with the homeschooling things, we're happy to help with that as well. And if you're going to any of the conferences, like let's meet in person. Let's go to a meetup together. Let's go to a conference together. We just love meeting other Bitcoiners.
Yes, yes. Thank you. And everyone listening, make sure you give Scott a follow and check out Free Market Kids for their games. Check out their podcasts on the homeschooling stuff. It's great. And I also want to thank AC for coming up and talking, and also Gary with Bitcoin Mentor and Nathan on the Bitcoin Mentor handle. Thanks for joining the conversation today. Really appreciate it. And if you want to learn more about Bitcoin Mentor, you can go to bitcoinmentor.io and email one of us, book a free session, and find out how we can help you on your Bitcoin journey. Anything from self custody, your Bitcoin, running a node, multi sig, we can help you out with that. If you want to tune into the spaces, make sure you give me at the Live Free B2C handle a follow and the Bitcoin Mentor handle a follow. You can be notified. We do them every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern time. So until we talk next time, enjoy your weekend, everybody, and we'll see you again on Monday.
Take care, everybody.
Yeah, thanks
Take
again,
care.
Scott.